I will continue to add anybody that comes in as we get started here, but thank you all for taking time today to join us for this Enlist informational webinar. And I'm going to turn the host over to Harlan Osmus, and he is going to start this webinar.
Before you turn me over right away, let me make some opening comments, Michelle, and then turn me over to my slides. Okay. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining this informational session about the Enlist platform. You are going to be experiencing in the next few years what has already started, and it's the fastest growing trait and herbicide platform that you've experienced since the mid-90s when Roundup Ready crops came out. We're experiencing, from the retail perspective, very high demand and very high interest in the soybean production world for the Enlist products and trait platform. At this point in time, keep in mind we have just 2 Enlist products for you to pick from. Enlist 1, which is straight choline 2,4-D formulation, and Enlist Dual, which is an Enlist plus Durango glyphosate product pre-mixed. What we're going to be focusing in on today are 2 main things. I'm going to start off with the adjuvant package that we recommend that you put in combination with the Enlist herbicide platform to achieve maximum performance. And secondly, Ron is going to go through the use requirements as dictated by the EPA. Many of you have probably become accustomed to being told what to do in recent years, and let me say that's not going to go away. But the more we can manage this topic and apply things correctly, the less we'll be put under scrutiny and told what to do. So tank mix partners differ if you're using Enlist 1 or Enlist Duo. And so check the website frequently, and Ron will probably touch on this when we get to him. Check the website frequently as to know what tank mix partners can be put with each of the Enlist brands, or consult with your AFS agronomist so that you are applying a legal tank mix. And in the future, there may be more Enlist premix products to come. All right. The lead adjuvant recommendation Osmus Farm Supply will recommend that you put with Enlist herbicide applications is called Tarragon Extra. Tarragon Extra is a drift reduction water conditioning premix that increases deposition and coverage associated with tank mix applications. It's a complete convenient premix designed especially for use with Enlist brands and other 2,4-D based herbicides. It improves spray droplet deposition, coverage, and drift control. So adjuvant usage has turned into way more than just, let me use AMS for penetration and absorption. Let me use a non-ionic surfactant or a crop oil for spreading and coverage. This really has turned into taking the herbicide base ingredient and making it as effective as possible, whether it's a fungicide, herbicide, or insecticide, by implementing tools that will help it penetrate and spread and stay on the leaf longer, and those sorts of ideas. So Tarragon Extra is compatible with all Enlist approved nozzles. It's an easy, low use rate of 2 quarts per 100 gallons of water. There's a video 1 minute long here I'm going to play, which is a side-by-side application of water being applied and water plus Tarragon Extra. Look at the stars in the sky type of a thing. How many more droplets there are on the Tarragon Extra side? That's one thing. The second thing is watch in slow motion what happens to some of our spray droplets as it hits weed surfaces. Of course, your intent in applying a herbicide or anything through a spray solution is to get it to stay on the plant. That means a higher dose is on the plant for penetration and kill for the best control. We don't want droplets rolling off and hitting the ground. That's the deposition part of it. Spray cards can be used to indicate to us how many droplets we have and what size they are and where they're ending up in the spray canopy. If you lay cards out at various depth in the canopy, from surface of plant to midway to ground level, to see where droplets are and the size they are. So on the left side, we have 4 cards, and those left 4 green bars, 49.2% is the top left card, 44.7 top right, 48.7 bottom left, and 51 bottom right, for an average of 48.4% of the droplets were retained on leaves, as compared to no DRA in the tank of an average of 23.2. So we achieved our goal of spray deposition onto the leaf surface with the addition of Terragon Extra. So there are adjuvant options for the Enlist platform. You can use ammonium sulfate, 2.5 pounds per acre. At the current price of 50 cents a pound, that's $1.25, but that's quickly going to go to 60 cents a pound. So which will raise its cost to $1.50. We would also recommend a quart per 100 of non-ionic surfactant. That's what NIS means, $1.42. So that combination would be $2.67 to $2.92 an acre range. And in that combination, we have no deposition product in the spray solution. Non-ionic surfactant is a great spreader, somewhat of a sticker, but not to the level that the 2 products at the bottom would provide to you. The Terragon Extra, as I described before, 2 quarts per 100 will cost you $2.74 an acre using 15 gallons of water. Another option we have is Border Extra 8L at 1.5 gallons per 100, $2.89 an acre. The reason there's such a higher use rate for Border Extra 8L versus Terragon Extra is it's a true liquid ammonium sulfate product, which does contain nitrogen. That would be important for you to use or to consider using if Liberty will be your tank mix partner with Enlist One. As you may be well aware, Liberty requires nitrogen in the spray solution to be the most effective. So we would either take Terragon Extra and add 1 pound per acre of ammonium sulfate, or replace Terragon Extra with Border Extra 8L, 1.5 gallons. In extremely tough conditions, maybe large weeds or droughty conditions, we would still recommend ammonium sulfate at 1 pound per acre with Border Extra 8L, or with Terragon Extra, of course, with Liberty being the tank mix partner. And I'll introduce Ron Geis, Technical Services Product Representative from Corteva AgroScience, to take us into this combination or this conversation about EPA use requirements with the Enlist platform. Ron.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today. This is going to be focused on Enlist, and the topics I want to hit are some of the latest news that we have, be it press releases and label changes. We'll go through the Enlist system and managing weeds within the Enlist system. We will cover some of the label highlights and then a little bit on the farmer feedback.
Ron, no slide deck yet.
Oh.
I see it.
Okay. I'm going to assume, Michelle, since you see it, others do. A handful of you want to throw in a comment into the chat there and say yes or no?
Garrett, can you see it? Others are saying they can see it. That's good.
Yep.
You
Okay.
go ahead, Ron.
Okay, I'll do that. You run over into the conference room with Michelle if you want to watch, Harlan. Okay. So as Harlan said, this is a very fast growing technology. When you just think in 2019 that this was initially launched in January, we received that clearance. Last year, it made up 30% of the market, and this year it looks like it's going to be half of the soybean market in the USA. Coming in line with that is also the seed. The seed ramp up is going very rapid. This will be Corteva seed. This will be our lead technology by far. You know, I think some branches of Corteva will still carry some other non-Enlist, but mostly we're going to be Enlist. We have 120 other seed organizations that have adopted the Enlist platform. And I think that recent announcement of Bayer entering into the Enlist market with Enlist seed just goes to show that this is the technology, you know, this is where the puck is going if it's not already there, you know, to quote the great Wayne Gretzky. This is our 6th year of commercial use. Now, wait a second, that doesn't line up because soybeans just got here in 2019. Cotton, all right, we had cotton acres prior to this. So it was nice to have that market just to, you know, kind of test the water before the big soybean market. This slide a year ago said 25 million acres sprayed. Now we're up to 50 total million acres sprayed. Really good farmer feedback in regards to weed control, in regards to the ease of spraying. And we're excited now that we can tout that there's a 7-year label under, you know, with this new label extension. Yeah, there's some bumps that we need to work through, and we'll talk about those bumps here real shortly. So one of the bumps, and I don't see this as a major bump, but let's talk through it so you understand. This is, there have been EPA labels that have restrictions as far as soil runoff management. Atrazine has that restriction. The sulfentrazone authority sonic products have these restrictions, but this is the first time that there was actually a point system put into place to deal with that. That's the way EPA decided that we need to work against. Now, I'm here to say that of you on the call, 99.9% of you don't have to worry about being able to make your points to make a legal application, but we will cover this. On the soil runoff, the EPA requires 4 to 6 points are necessary to comply with the label. 4 points if you have a sandy or a loamy sand type of a soil. 6 points if it's a silt or heavier. I know initially that sounds completely backwards, but think of it as soil runoff. You get that toad strangler type rain in sand, it's going to push down into the soil. It's not going to run off and take soil with it. In a silt or a clay, it's likely to take treated soil with it. That's why the heavier soils require more points. All right, so you know you need these points. How do you get these points? Tillage. In a mulch till, which is defined as a 20% or more residue cover, and I'll show you a picture of what 20% residue looks like, or no-till or strip till, you've got 4 of your necessary 6 points. If your total Enlist applications are twice per season, then you earn another 2 points. And right there, a typical scenario is, yeah, hey, I work my fields, I work my corn stubble, but yes, I keep 20% residue. So there's my 4 points, and I only plan to use Enlist once or twice. If I use it once, there's 4 points, twice there's 2. So I got 6 to 8 points right there. I'm in compliance, no need to worry. The only thing on a tillage standpoint is if you are moldboard plowing, you might not get those 4 points. But I'm going to say for most people that moldboard plow, the reason they moldboard plow is to tear up an alfalfa crop, and alfalfa crop typically goes to corn, not to soybeans. So unless you're planting Enlist corn, and this may prevent you from using Enlist on the Enlist corn, you know, you're pretty well going to be fine there. If you haven't reached your 6 points, you know, in those top 2 categories, field borders, you know, grass buffer strips, contour farming, cover crops, all these other things can add a point or 2 with each of them, and you can get to your 6 points. Another label change is the county restrictions around endangered species. we'll cover that in a subsequent slide here. Third change is the label has now been restricted to applications through R1. So once we start getting the flowers on top of the soybeans, then that's a cutoff. This is not being restricted because of any crop safety or drift concerns. This used to be through R2, by the way. It's now through R1. It's just because of the potential for spraying these fields while pollinators are out in the fields, and that's why EPA imposed that restriction. The rain fast period, that has now clearly been defined as 4 hours. If you look at previous labels, the previous Enlist label really never gave a rain fast period. So now we have that clearly defined as 4 hours on the label. And if we have a forecast that's calling for a rainfall that will create soil erosion within 48 hours, then it's a do not spray until after that rainfall event. But it does define that rainfall event as one that's likely to produce soil runoff. So 10 hundredths, 20 hundredths, you're going to be fine. Go ahead and spray. So let's go to that residue cover. This is just a picture of what a 20% residue cover looks like. The way that you measure that, you see your tape measure, and I'm going to say the simple way to measure that, you lay your tape out in a catty corner direction to your tillage, and every place you take 100 feet, and every place you have a foot marking, do I or don't I have a piece of residue touching that foot marker? So you just count them up and then do that in several places in the field. And as long as 20% of those marks is a check mark, then there's your 20% residue cover. Like I say, if you're moldboard plowing, probably not going to make it. Anything else, disc chiseling, field cultivating, is very rare that you're not achieving at least a 20% residue cover. So let's dive into these endangered species counties. And I know for those of you on the phone or on the call here, where we have the state of Minnesota involved, there's a little bit of angst around that. So you'll see on the map that, that you've got the counties in pink. These are the counties in which Enlist is registered. I'm sorry, these are the states in which Enlist is registered. That map looks virtually unchanged from a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. We never did have those western states or those very northeast states ever registered within the Enlist label because they really don't have a use for Enlist to begin with. Then you notice the colored counties within the map. There's the big gray area, South Dakota, Nebraska, down Kansas, Oklahoma, and a few of these other areas. Those are restricting both Enlist 1 and Enlist Duo. And then you look at the pink or purple counties up there in Minnesota and a few other states. Those are only restricting Enlist Duo. So the difference, well, Harlan mentioned that straight goods Enlist 1 has one ingredient, the Enlist, the 2,4-D choline. Enlist Duo has 2 ingredients, Enlist with glyphosate, and the concern on those purple counties is the glyphosate component. So right now, Enlist Duo is restricted on those counties, but Enlist 1 is not. So it's the glyphosate component that's creating the concern on that. And those Minnesota counties, I have them listed up here as to which counties that they actually are. So we received this new label January 11, and within a few days, we submitted the data that would potentially reverse all of those or many of those Enlist 1 counties. Apparently, the issue was we did not provide adequate proof that an endangered species, which is primarily a beetle that feeds on decaying carcasses. So let me give you this example where that matters. Let's say you sprayed a field with Enlist and a deer eats the spray, because it eats the leaves. That night, the deer gets out on the road and gets hit by a car and dies. And then this beetle comes in and infects that deer. to decompose it, because that's what that endangered species does that Enlist damage that beetle? We didn't give adequate proof of that. That's why those counties are restricted, because those are the counties where that beetle's been identified. And now we've submitted that data. Will we get that approval before the use season or not? We don't know. We're traveling at the speed of EPA, but we do feel that in the future, maybe not this season, but in the future, that many of those blue counties will come back in. As far as the other counties, the orange ones on this map, that's different information, and that may be a longer delay before that could potentially be overturned. And that one we're not as sure as to whether that will get overturned in the near run or the long term or not.
Ron, could you make a comment in those orange counties where Enlist Duo, back up one slide, where Enlist
Yes.
Duo is not legal to be applied, but they can make a mixture of their own of Enlist One and glyphosate?
Thank you, Harlan. Yes.
How in the world does that work?
Okay. So here's how EPA works. When a product is being re-registered, that's when EPA makes changes. Glyphosate, Roundup specifically, and any subsequent products thereof, is not up for re-registration yet at this time. So glyphosate does not have this restriction upon it. So if I use Enlist One and mix glyphosate, that's still a perfectly legal application at this time. Now, in the future, when glyphosate does come up for re-registration, that restriction may accompany all glyphosate, as a single product. It may still be that mixture products containing glyphosate aren't affected until they come up for re-registration. That may not make smart sense. If glyphosate's problem isn't a problem everywhere, but it makes EPA sense because of how they do things. And I also wanted to pull this slide up just because if you've got any surrounding states, that you're from or consulting on or whatever, South Dakota, you can see those counties, specifically laid out there, whatever, some of these other counties, if you have touch upon them. So what we're doing is, I guess I've kind of talked through this. We have submitted the data. You see that third point down there. The vast majority of these counties we feel will be able to mitigate soon, I hope, in time for this use season. Certainly, if I was a farmer out there, I would want that. And I'm afraid, though, in the glyphosate issue, I'm not expecting it, to be real rapid because of, it's just a different data package. Enlist corn, I want to touch upon this. So we've talked a little bit about the Enlist soybeans, but where are we going in the future here? Enlist corn is currently available with through the power cord and some smart stacks. The really exciting thing about Enlist corn is its tolerance to the FOP technology. FOP, okay, what are we talking here? Quizalofop, all right? Assure 2, Fusilade would not kill the Enlist corn. And Assure 2 actually has a label to use on Enlist corn. So let's just say you had a bad volunteer corn, or you had a lot of harvest lost with corn, and for whatever reason, you got to go back to corn on that field. If you planted the Enlist corn, you could spray that Enlist corn with Assure 2, assuming that last year's crop was not also Enlist corn, and it would keep your Enlist corn perfectly safe and kill the volunteer corn. All right. A recent announcement is just at Commodities Classic, Vorseed. That is going to be the new trait of Corteva, which carries an enhanced rootworm control, but it also brings along, I'm going to say for the ride, a 4-way herbicide enablement. Enlist, glyphosate, Liberty, or glufosinate, and Assure 2. So when we look at recent changes within the Enlist system, those are kind of the headline items. So what about the weed control with the Enlist system, or what is it that the weed control system brings? We really look at three different things that we would say would be the entire Enlist system. It would be the crops themselves, the chemicals themselves, and then finally this Enlist Ahead, which is really our resource management, everything that we're bringing to the table to help assist you as a potential user of Enlist to make sure that you're being safe and effective, being a good steward, and being a good, that you get your money's worth out of what you're doing. So let's look at each of these kind of individually. The trait package with Enlist soybeans. Enlist soybeans is tolerant to the 2,4-D choline, or the Enlist chemical. The soybeans are also tolerant to glufosinate, Liberty, and it's also tolerant to glyphosate. So 3 tolerances built within the seed. You have those same 3 tolerance built within the cotton seed as well. And then, as we just mentioned, the Enlist corn has the 4 chemical tolerances, including the FOP herbicides. So let's look at the chemicals themselves. Harlan mentioned earlier that we have the straight goods Enlist 1, and what that straight goods Enlist 1, by the way, that's 90% of our sales between the two, 90% are the straight goods Enlist 1. What it brings more than anything else is tank mix flexibility. So when I talk about that, EPA requires any tank mixture to pass a drift test, all right? So just to put this into understandable terms, Enlist 1 by itself is on the good side of the drift curve. Enlist 1, you can add other things to it, which would increase the drift potential, but it's just barely making the curve to start with. So you add a second ingredient, it's still passing the drift test with flying colors. Enlist 1 also gives you an easy flexibility to customize your glyphosate rate, based on your needs. And Enlist 1 has the clearance to put glufosinate or Liberty with it. Enlist Duo is a little further down the curve as far as the passing the drift test. So we add another ingredient, which would increase drift, to the Enlist Duo, and a lot of times those don't make it. They don't make the cut for passing the drift test. So that's why we have many more tank mix options with Enlist 1 than what we have with Enlist Duo. Now, for that farmer that's just going to use Enlist Duo, it's nice to have it all together in one package. It's one shuttle instead of 2. I get that. But I'm going to circle back on that made in USA. And this isn't just motherhood and apple pie, touting the fact that we're made in the USA. We don't have to rely on a ship coming in to bring ingredients to make Enlist 1. Every ingredient, every component is made right here in the USA. So supply is not an issue. Even with the extreme rapid introduction and extreme increase in need, we still have plenty of Enlist 1 to meet that need. And that's an important thing now in this year's, kind of the environment that we're in now. I do want to mention one thing, and especially for people that have never seen this before, it's the potential for crop response. And we would call it sleepy or droopy beans. Now, where we'll see that, we won't see this every time. In fact, probably not very commonly seen, but if we've got really warm and humid conditions, these beans will get droopy. It might make your stomach, jump into your throat when you see this. You might have a fill a load, go back home, refill, get back to the field, and I'm seeing this in my field. Did I get the wrong beans or did I get the wrong chemical? I know it looks extremely vivid. Yes, we picked one of the more severe pictures to show you. Typically within 24 hours, it's grown out of it. We would say even up to 48, and we've tested, no impact on yield. But it'll make your heart stop if you weren't expecting to see that. So Enlist Ahead. Now we talked about this third pillar, and this is actually our support system. We started this support system back when we launched this whole technology 10 years ago. But what this includes is a number of things. Online webinars. You can go to enlist.com, and in addition to what you're seeing today, you can pull up a host of webinars that are pre-recorded. There were live webinars like this that have been recorded, and get additional training there. I do want to mention that training with Enlist is completely voluntary, but highly encouraged. It's going to make up half of your acres in a lot of our operations. You got half your acres corn, half soybeans. Want to make sure you're doing things right so you're happy with your results. And a third asset that we have are a full team of field specialists. We have an Iowa specialist, Scott Youngman. In fact, Scott mentioned he might even be on today's call. So if I get off the rails, Scott, jump in, correct me here. Scott Snyder up in Minnesota. And basically every state has an Enlist specialist that people like me would tap into, or people like Harlan can tap into, if you get some really complex type of questions. Product use guides, and like I said, the online training that's available on enlist.com. And we feel this stewardship and the educational part of Enlist and all the resourcing we're bringing to that is important enough to be one of the legs of a three-legged stool: the seed, the chemical, and the education part of that. So these are all the resources kind of listed in a different way. I've sort of talked through those. All right, let's talk weed management with the Enlist system. It's no secret that weeds are shifting, that they're developing resistance. You can look at your state color on how many different glyphosate resistant weeds are out here. But that's only going to increase. I mean, let's think back 30 years ago. Now, some of you on the call may think I wasn't alive 30 years ago, but those of us that were in this business, we were attacking weeds several different ways. We would do field preparation. That would attack a lot of those early season weeds. We'd plant our crop and then we'd come through and cultivate. And most of us over 50 can remember days upon days of pulling or cutting or chopping weeds, by hand. Right now, all we're really doing is attacking them with herbicides. And yeah, it's important to get multiple herbicide modes out there. We really need to be a little more holistic. I'm excited about things like cover crops, just the weed suppressing effect that you can get from things like that, or these combine harvest your seeds and smash them things. We need to get beyond just herbicides for weed control. But until we get to that point, we've got to make sure we really mix this up so that we're able to throw a different curve at each of these weeds. Let's not make the mistake with Enlist that we did with Roundup, where it was just Roundup, and then more Roundup. If we do Enlist, and more Enlist, 5 years from now, we're going to find ourselves in the same situation. We can't be there because there's not a host of new things to bring along. So let's talk about what we need to do to make sure we maximize our performance here. Spray when the weeds are small. If I look at a weed that's 6 inches tall, it probably has in the neighborhood of 10 growth points that I have to control. If I don't kill all 10 of those growth points, I've got a surviving plant that regrows. I'd even feel better if you sprayed, no more than 4-inch weeds when you had about 4 or 5 growth points to kill. But you add just 3 more inches to that plant. Let's say you get up there to 9 or 10-inch weeds. You go from having to kill about 10 growth points to having to kill about 50 growth points, because it starts to branch. And each of those branches have branches that each have growth points. And if you don't kill every growth point, you have a live plant that comes back. Spray when weeds are actively growing. All right, that means, I take last year as a real good example. It got to be 95 degrees and the humidity was 20%. Those weeds weren't actively growing, they were shutting down. So when you get those extreme conditions, spray during the good growth time of day and park it during the times when it's too hot or too cold. If we have those extremely cold mornings, always use full rates. You look at the rates on the side. That's one cleanup that we had in the label. There was a rate range before. Now there is no range. Use 2 pints for Enlist 1 or 4.7 pints of Enlist Duo per acre. There's a qualified nozzle list, and we'll get into nozzles here in a bit. Also make sure you're going towards the upper end of that range within the nozzle, and always make sure you use sufficient volume. This is kind of a stock slide. I know it shows that 10 to 15 gallons per acre. I really encourage that 15, unless you're spraying with Liberty as your tank mix instead of glyphosate as your tank mix. Then use 20 gallons of water. That just is proven to do a much more effective job with the Liberty mix at 20. We also want to look at a whole program approach, system approach. Start clean. All right, if you're tilling, start clean, make sure your tillage kills your weeds. If the tillage doesn't kill all the weeds with one tillage pass, make a second pass. Start clean. Apply a soil residual. This could be, if it's in no-till, this could be in combination with your burn down product with the 2,4-D or Enlist as a burn down. And you know, several products are listed here. Our competitors have another 2 dozen to add to that list, but use a good, strong, solid residual herbicide. And then when you come back post-emerge, and I'm sorry, I couldn't change this slide. It says no later than R2. That's now R1. I want to point that out. But use your Enlist, and always tank mix your Enlist with either a glyphosate product, like we mentioned here with Durango is our preferred glyphosate, whichever, you know, whatever glyphosate you use, or tank mix it with Liberty. Why is that so important? If we don't have that mixture in there, we are relying on one mode of action. And just by putting glyphosate or Liberty, we've now doubled our modes of action. And when you double your modes, you substantially reduce your chance that you're going to evolve a resistance issue. I know you might be thinking, I've already got Roundup resistant weeds. Why would I mix with Roundup? And that's a fair question. But the answer is we have repeatedly had much better success with the combination of the two than going it alone with either of these products alone.
Ron,
Now, yes, go ahead.
we have a question that came in. If you can you use more than 15 gallons per acre of water if you don't have Liberty in the tank mix?
Oh, yes, you can. Yes, there is no upper limit to the amount of gallons that you can use. Right? There's also another component I want to see in that mixture, and you see it here listed as Everprex for layered residual control. Everprex is our metolachlor, S-metolachlor product. All right, there's a dozen metolachlor products out there in the market. There's some other competitors out there in the market. You know, use whichever one makes sense for you, but please include a residual control at that point. Well, why? Well, because that residual product will give you 3 or 4, maybe 5 weeks of extra control, getting you deep into the season, much closer to when the soybeans are covering your rows, and therefore helping to extend that protection season long. If you're planting Enlist corn, you know, it's the same thing. Start clean, use a residual, and then if Enlist is part of your post-emerge application, you know, make sure that gets put on in a timely fashion. Okay, nozzle selection is important. We have found that, okay, in order to get an approved nozzle, the nozzle has to pass the drift test. This is one where I'm going to say those that pass the drift test with flying colors are the least desirable nozzle. Okay, why is that? Well, if they pass with flying colors, that means they're producing extremely large droplets. And as you saw in Harlan's video, you know, those larger droplets would have less of a chance of sticking to those plants than many more small and finer droplets. Let's just show an example here. Okay, you either have water or water with chemical, and you can see once you put chemical in, it does kind of change that pattern. But these nozzles here are the standard dicamba nozzles, those TTI nozzles. And Harlan gave you an example. This is your water sensitive paper, what that does. So I don't need to explain that to you. But this is what it looks like with the TTI nozzles. Let's change slides here. This is what that same water volume, same chemical mix looks like with the AIXR nozzle. Okay, much finer droplets, but still, passing the drift test, which is what we're after. So the reason we are recommending those AIXRs, or kind of going on the barely make it part of the list, is we just want better coverage. Now, some of you might be thinking, I use these nozzles with dicamba and I was perfectly happy with the performance I got. And I would agree with dicamba, that may very well be the case, but let's keep in mind, you're going to see a little bit of movement within that canopy with dicamba that you're not seeing with Enlist. So dicamba might be able to fill in some of those gaps. Enlist won't fill in those gaps for you. We always are going to recommend a tank mix partner of either Liberty or a glyphosate. Here's something I want you, though, to keep in mind. When you're mixing these products together, make sure you've got adequate water and adequate separation between the addition of your Enlist and then the addition of either your Liberty or your Roundup glyphosate product. Those two can fight each other in a mixed tank. As long as you get your Enlist over into your sprayer and it's mixing up with the water in the sprayer before you get your Liberty or your Roundup into the inductor, then into the sprayer. As long as there's some time in between there, then everything's going to be fine. But a mistake that people make is they've got an inductor, they drop these two chemicals raw on top of each other, and they form a jelly within the mixer before they ever get into the sprayer. If they're a jelly in the mixer, they're going to probably stay a jelly in the sprayer. So keep those two separated. I think we touched upon these, but it's probably important enough to get a full review here. Start with a good full rate of pre-emerge. Keep your rates of your Enlist products where they belong. Make sure you include a tank mix partner of either Liberty or glyphosate. Spray when the weeds are smaller, 1 to 6, and I'd prefer 1 to 4 inches. Add that post-emerge residual. Keep your gallonage up there. Water's still pretty cheap. Last time they charged me for it. 15 gallon is a minimum that I like on glyphosate. 20 gallons a minimum that I like when Liberty's the mix. Stay at the high end of your pressure range. I encourage you that 50 to 70 pounds per pressure. Harlan covered the additives really well. Either the Tarragon Extra or the Border Extra, and then use the right nozzles. And my quick check is, if it's approved for dicamba, I do not want that nozzle used for Enlist. Okay, some of the label highlights, all right? Enlist can be sprayed right up next to sensitive soybeans, and it's a legal application. So the picture on your left, those soybeans are sensitive to Enlist. We purposely went out on sensitive soybeans. You can see where we ran the sprayer and drew a line in the field to show two things. Number one, if you've got dicamba soybeans and you spray a full rate of Enlist on dicamba soybeans, you will kill your dicamba soybeans. Don't make that mistake. These traits don't cross over. But number two, okay, in this case, we had the wind blowing from left to right. So yeah, we drew a nice straight line. But afterwards, and this is the close-up picture that you can see, the photo on the right. If we look back into those soybean canopy, days later, you're not seeing puckered or cupped up beans, because the chemical, once it sets, it stays set. It doesn't pick up and move. It also does a better job of setting down in the first place. So here you've got a sprayer on the left that just has your traditional glyphosate and your traditional 2,4-D mix. And you see a lot of fine materials coming off of that. Enlist, either Enlist 1 or Enlist Duo, contains that Colex D. It's basically a built-in drift agent into the formulation. And look how much nicer that chemical lays down. You don't have nearly the amount of fine materials to move off target with your initial application. So some of the things that are legally allowed, you don't have any buffer requirements or setback required when the wind is blowing towards soybeans, blowing towards alfalfa. Okay, let me repeat that. I can have my Enlist field and I can have an alfalfa field next to it or a sensitive soybean next to it. The wind can be blowing into the alfalfa or those sensitive soybeans, and I can still make that spray application. Now, be a good neighbor. We allow applications from 3 to 10 miles an hour, up to 15. If you're pushing that 15 mile an hour and you're right up next to that, well, stay over 4 or 5 rows. Come back on those 4 or 5 rows once the wind has shifted. Treat it like you'd treat Roundup next to sensitive, Roundup crops, or Liberty next to sensitive Liberty, or a corn killer next to a cornfield. Don't ask for problems, and you won't get problems. The 2,4-D has been proven to stay put and to not have those fine applications, and it gives you a lot of flexibility as far as tank mixes, time to spray, and nozzles that you can select from. So these are the crops that are not listed as sensitive. As you can see in the picture here, you can spray into those, with the wind blowing into those, you can spray right into that. And that would be soybeans, and that would be alfalfa. Now, there are some crops, if the wind's blowing towards, do not spray. If the wind's blowing towards grapes, if the wind's blowing towards, somebody's pumpkin patch or cucumber patch, if the wind's blowing towards tomatoes, don't spray, because you're just asking for problems with that, and it's not a legal application. There's another EPA requirement, and this has to do with endangered species. So these are sensitive areas that potentially could contain an endangered species. Those sensitive areas would be woodland areas, pasture areas, even road ditches that might have endangered species. Because of the Endangered Species Act, if the wind's blowing towards them, then you need to give a 30-foot buffer, which you can turn around then, when the wind changes direction, and spray that 30 feet. The buffer has to deal with endangered species. The buffer does not have to deal with sensitive crops. Okay, you got a tomato house right next to the field, and the wind's blowing that way, you don't spray. So this will kind of outline where and why, and how can we spray next to sensitive soybeans, and I can't do that with dicamba. Well, how much Enlist does it take to give me a 50% yield loss on, and now you can look at your different crops here, but we'll use soybeans as an example. I can apply 2,4-D next to soybeans, and unless I'm drifting 50, 60, 70% of it onto those beans, I'm not going to suffer severe yield loss. But dicamba, as you can see by the gray bars, it doesn't take much dicamba to give you a 50% yield loss. That's why you've got this vivid difference with the wind blowing towards sensitive crop on 2,4-D versus dicamba. Okay, let's go to the other side of the slide, that very last one there where you have cotton. Well, it takes almost no 2,4-D on cotton to get 50% yield loss. So that's why you saw cotton, if you noticed, I didn't point it out, but that's why you have cotton listed as a do not spray when the wind's blowing towards it. Now, we're going to back up a little bit. 5 years ago, I think we've had 5 crops now of cotton that we've sprayed with 2,4-D. And you're probably not hearing any severe drift stories with 2,4-D on cotton. Nothing like what we've been hearing on the soybeans. So, with the other technology, I think is just a proof point. if you're responsible during your application, you don't have to worry about what happens tomorrow with a shift in wind. And that's a big benefit that the 2,4-D technology brings us. Okay, sprayer cleanout. The good news with the Enlist is it is a water soluble chemical. So I don't fear sprayer cleanout as long as you follow your triple rinse cleanout method as described in the label or any of the product use guides. Mostly start empty and then fill your sprayer with about a 10% volume of water, get that thoroughly agitated, blow that through. Then again, 10% with a neutralizer in there, and then let that circulate and blow that through. And then finish with fresh water, again, 10% of your volume, let that circulate and blow through. The water flushes most of it. The neutralizer makes sure that if anything's left, it's neutralized. And then the fresh water flushes the neutralizer out, so the neutralizer doesn't neutralize your next chemical that goes in. Okay, that's why we do that type of a procedure. It's water soluble. Enlist is water soluble, so it flushes fairly easily. Farmer feedback. I'm just going to put these up here. You can kind of look at your own. In fact, those of you on the line, you might have your own testimonials about the performance and the ease of use that you see while you're using this Enlist technology. And we just pulled some quotes from farmers throughout the corn and soybean growing states, even a cotton farmer here or there that has had good experience with the Enlist technology. More resources are out there on training on enlist.com. You've got the training modules there. You've got, which are voluntary, but encourage you to look at them. Tank mix partner list, the nozzle list. We've got some literature and things available. We also have our field specialists, those people that call on your Osmus Farm Supply stores, and our statewide Enlist specialists that are out here. So let's kind of summarize here. We went through sort of the latest news on Enlist. There were some label changes, all I think of which are manageable as long as you're not in a county that says do not do. But even those of you in Minnesota that are in those counties, you can still mix Enlist 1 with glyphosate. You just cannot use the pre-combined product of Enlist Duo. This market is growing and seed companies are ramping up seed supply to meet that need. We looked at the whole system overview. It's a three-legged stool. It involves the enabled crops. It involves having the two herbicide options with Enlist 1 and Enlist Duo. And that third piece, which I feel is just as important, a solid stewardship and educational leg to that stool so that you can have confidence that you're doing the right thing and doing the things right. We looked at weed management. Start with a solid pre-emerge treatment and then come back timely with your post with Enlist and either glyphosate or Liberty in that mixture. And third, make sure you have that extended residual product with that post. Sensitive crops, it does give you the flexibility to go next to sensitive, next to soybeans or next to alfalfa with the wind blowing towards them. Just be a good neighbor. But if you've got tomatoes, you've got grapes, you've got gardens, wait till the wind is shifted so that it's pushing that chemical away. And then the farmers that have used it, really like the system and they generally return back to it. All right, Michelle, I think we're back to you.
We do have one question that came in. What is recommended rates for killing volunteer corn and beans?
Oh, okay. The volunteer corn with the Enlist system, and I didn't touch upon that, but I have done a number of those studies myself. I'm going to start with the chemical. Let's go there first. We have had outstanding success with the clethodim line of products for volunteer corn control. That would be Select. I don't know, Harlan, what brands of clethodim? Clethidim's many brands of clethodim.
Select Max, and the generic version would be Intensity.
Okay. So where I've tested those, I've had excellent results with the Select. We recommend increasing your rate by 33 to 50% because there is some antagonism. So if normally you're using 8 ounces, bump it to 10 to 12. The next best product to use is Fusilade. And I would take my Fusilade rate up 50% if I'm using it, not 33 to 50, but 50. The third choice is Assure, or I don't know, is that the brand that you carry, Harlan?
Yes.
I've been very disappointed with Assure. Now, I want to bring up that those of you that have been on the dicamba system, you might be saying the exact opposite. You might say, I really struggled to get my Select to work, but my Fusilade worked great. Okay, this is different. This is different. Select works the best, followed by Fusilade. And I am not a fan of mixing Assure and Enlist together. I was more likely to have problems even at 16 ounces, which is double the rate. 16 ounces of Assure. I had better results with 8 to 10 ounces of Select versus the 16 of Assure.
Say, Michelle, I think I'll ask the next question because it's maybe more complicated than you can explain.
That sounds great.
Ron, make a comment about in a no-till burn down situation where Enlist beans are being planted. As you know, over the years using traditional 2,4-D products, we have a window of time where we aren't supposed to plant those beans.
Yes.
If I'm planting Enlist beans and I'm using an Enlist Duo or Enlist One as the burn down style of 2,4-D, is there a plant back restriction?
With Enlist One or Enlist Duo, you can spray that before, during, or after planting. That can be applied anytime, before, during, or after. Now, obviously, I'm not going to say during because of the dust and things like that, but you're legal, you're fine, won't damage your beans at any point in time. The traditional 2,4-D products still carry their same 7-day, 10-day, 14-day type of restrictions, depending on the rate and the formulation.
So I think I'll add in one additional question to that topic. If somebody is planting Enlist beans and they want to use traditional 2,4-D as the burn down product, when does that traditional 2,4-D become an off-label application on that crop?
That's what the label is going to tell you. And that's probably going to be 7 days if you're at 1 pint, and it's probably going to be 14, 15 days at 2 pints.
14 or 15 days after what?
Oh, prior to planting. I'm sorry, prior to planting.
There you go. Okay.
Those have a cutoff that you have to wait that many days before you can plant.
Yep.
Amine formulations, I want to throw this one in. I know most people don't have amine in their shed, and I think that's good. Amine formulations, some of those carry a 30-day wait period. Amine's just enough different that it has a longer restriction.
Had one more come in on volunteer corn. Is it beneficial to do a second pass with volunteer corn killer?
Well, if your volunteer corn chemical is Assure 2, I'm going to tell you to do the Assure 2, wait 2-3 days, and then use your Enlist. I have had that poor of performance with the Assure that's going to be my recommendation. Would I go a 2-pass program with a Select or a Fusilade? You know, let your mathematics, your time, and those things make that dictation for you. If you're okay making 2 passes through the field, that's great. Then you don't have any antagonism. You can make that corn pass again. Wait 2 or 3 days, and then come back and put your broadleaf. And I guess that's the case with any chemical, any system at which there's known to be an antagonism. Splitting those apart is always an option. We sometimes forget to even mention that. I'm glad that got brought up.
Yeah, let's go back 30 years with that recommendation with conventional beans. Remember, we used to do one way or the other. Spray the grass first, broadleaf could be 24 hours later, spray the broadleaf first, corn killer, grass killer, back then it was post, needed to be, what did we say, 7 days?
A week minimum.
Yeah.
So I'm saying always do the grass first because typically it takes you a couple, 3 days to get through all your fields. By the time you're done with that, you can circle If the weather allows, you can circle right back around. The one that's being antagonized is the one that needs to go first. The antagonizer, in this case 2,4-D, the antagonizer needs to wait, because you don't want that sitting in the plant antagonizing things when you try to put the other one in on top of it.
Good point. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yep.
I think that wraps up the questions that we have. So thank you, Ron, for joining us today.
No, I want to thank Ron for joining us today, providing excellent information, and we thank you all for your business. Thank you.
You
for
bet. And I
attending.
thank you, same for the business, and thank you, Harlan and Michelle, for hosting this and for partnering with us. It's a good partnership.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.